listening to the Global Leadership Podcast, relevant leadership conversations for you, the curious leader. I'm Ashlyn, your producer and host. I have loved producing this podcast for the last 5 years. We're more passionate than ever to create cutting-edge leadership content for you. So can you help us? If you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us a comment, review the show, and let us know what's helping you. We're going to analyze it all as we're planning for the year ahead. Thanks so much for being a part of this community of curious, growth-minded leadership enthusiasts. Now, let's get to the show. Today, let's get curious about the value of leading with your authentic self.
Showing people that you appreciate who they are distinctly is the thing that gives people the courage and the empowerment to continue to show who they are.
We're privileged to hear from one of the most influential women on Wall Street. Carla Harris has been recognized on numerous lists. These two stood out to me. She's on Fortune magazine's most influential list and has also been named one of the 50 most powerful Black executives in corporate America. What's fascinating to me about this is Carla has always led out of who she truly is. Her power is her authenticity. In fact, you hear her authenticity come right through in today's conversation with CEO of Obis and my podcast teammate, Mitch Barns. I can imagine that her tone, her values, her insight that is shared on this episode would similarly be shared with a colleague at Morgan Stanley after an executive meeting. Yes, by the way, Carla Harris is the Vice Chairman, Managing Director, and Senior Client Advisor at Morgan Stanley, and she sits on both Walmart and Harvard's boards. If there's anyone to learn from about the value of leading out of who you are, how that ripples into inclusion, empowering others, and benefiting the organization, it's Carla. So let's dive into the show. Get ready, get curious. Here's Carla Harris and Mitch Barns.
Well, Carla, it's such a pleasure to be with you. I first saw you speak at the Global Leadership Summit in 2018, and I've seen other talks that you've given since, and I'm a big fan.
Well, thank you, Mitch.
Now, one thing that really stands out to me when you speak is how you're simultaneously personal and precise in what you say. And I know a lot of people who are one of those things or the other of those things, but in my experience, it's rare for somebody to do both of those things exceptionally well at the same time. And for me, it's evidence of your integrity, evidence of somebody who's fully connected in the way that they think and that they live. And my guess is it has a lot to do with why you're such an accomplished and influential leader. And so let's start there.
Okay.
And let's go back maybe to when you were first starting to identify as a leader. And I'd be interested to hear, how did that come about? Did somebody point it out for you, or was it a realization that you came to on your own?
You know, I'll tell you, Mitch, as far back as I can remember, even during elementary school, I've always wanted to be someone who sort of earned the right to be able to lead the group, or to aspire to a point where people would want to work with me, if you will, if that makes sense. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that my parents always made me feel that I was supposed to do well. And part of doing well means that you earn the right to work with others and to be able to lead them, especially if you have good ideas and you're willing to work hard. And so I can remember that as part of my psyche, even as a little kid. And then as I started moving throughout my career, and I had different deals that I worked on and different levels of responsibility, I realized that I had the opportunity to lead. And as I got more senior as a woman and a person of color, I really felt like I had the responsibility to lead and to be able to use my voice and leverage all the experience that I had had. So let's say my first aha moment professionally was probably 6 or 7 years into my career, because by then I'd had enough knocks and bruises and enough information and expertise that I felt like I had acquired the war stories that you need in order to be able to convince clients that you know what you're doing, that you've been there before, that you're going to be able to give them good advice.
Well, let's pick it up there then. If you're at that point, 6 or 7 years into your career, and that realization starts to crystallize for you, maybe share with us a little bit about how that started to impact how you thought about your work and your goals and maybe even your mission in life.
Sure. By then, for sure, because I was leading transactions and I had people who were working with me that were of less tenure. So they were the associates, they were the analysts. I was very intentional, Mitch, even back then as an early stage leader about how I treated people and wanted people to understand that I valued them. They were equal contributors. While we might have had different titles, the firm couldn't get it done unless we collectively did it well together. And I think one of the things that I actually am grateful for is you can imagine back in the late 80s and early 90s, everything you heard about Wall Street was more fact than it was fiction at the time. And there was a lot of examples of poor leadership, bad leadership. And so for me, that was just as instructional as somebody who I thought was a really great leader or that I really did want to work for. And so a lot of that informed my own leadership style, as much of I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that. That doesn't motivate me. I don't find that very inspirational or motivational. So I'm not going to do that. So those things, as well as the positive examples, I would say inform my leadership style as well.
Yeah, that's great. If somebody takes on the full responsibility of leadership, and you're clearly somebody who understands that it means that you're taking on not just the good parts of leadership, but also the not so good parts, the extra strains and stresses and burdens and the obligation to do things even if you don't want to do them, right? That's sort of what the full package is all about. But if we're not careful, then those extra strains and stresses and burdens, they can start to wear on us. And over time, they can actually start to wear us down. So how have you, Carla, in your leadership been able to manage those extra stresses and burdens so that you're able to sustain excellence and focus in your leadership on an ongoing basis?
Well, I have to tell you, Mitch, that's where I would argue my spirituality is front and center. It's so easy as a leader day in and day out to get caught up, as you say, with the things that people expect you to do or the things that are clearly your responsibility as a leader, the good and the bad decisions. But you know as well as I do that there are a lot of things that you cannot control. There are things that may come across your plate that you don't necessarily agree with. And that's where I think being true to who you are as a child of God and using that as your lens and your measure. So I'll give you an example. Let's say someone has asked you to do something that you don't necessarily agree with philosophically. So what do you do with that? Because you're a leader, you got to toe the company line, but you also need to be authentic, and you can afford to be authentic when you know whose you are and not who you are. So in that situation, I might message to the team, the firm's view is X. This is what we're being asked to do. Personally, I do think that we might have the opportunity to do, X, Y, and Z, although we're being told A, B, and C. So how I'm thinking about a happy medium between A, B, and C and X, Y, and Z, it might look like this. So this is how we might be able to prosecute this. And there you are being honest and transparent about what the expectations of the organization are, but you're being honest and transparent about how you might feel about them. And you're also being honest and transparent about how you're managing through that as a leader, and therefore what you might be asking of the team. And I think the confidence that you have in whose you are allows you to do that without any fear or trepidation around it. And that's just one simple example. But obviously there are other things that come up if somebody's asking you to do something that you think is just outright wrong or that pushes you up against your moral line. If you default to the base case of whose you are, that helps you migrate through those decisions, which in turn makes them less burdensome and heavy, which in turn allows you to have the energy to be able to continue to deliver with excellence.
Yeah, indeed. Now, Carla, the way you incorporate that into those situations and your thinking and your decision-making, is that something that is just a very private set of considerations for you, or is it something that's evident to the people who are around you, people who are working with you and a part of that same effort?
Yeah, you know what? It really does depend, right? Sometimes it might be a private moment. As I used to say, I'll go to my private office, the ladies' room, right? And I'll pray about it and get some guidance. And in other cases, I might say outright to the team, this one's a tough one. I think I'm going to have to pray on this one and see if I get clarity, right? So I'll say it like that. And they know generally I'm not kidding.
Carla, one of the many positive workplace trends, certainly from my perspective in recent years, is the increased emphasis on diversity and inclusion and the recognition of the important role these play in an organization's growth and strength and ability to innovate. Carla, how does a leader best invite and enable team members to bring all of who they are to work? Their different racial and ethnic backgrounds, different genders, people from different generations, and also, importantly, the role that faith plays at work for many people.
Yes, I have to say the first thing that you have to do as a leader to encourage people to bring all of who they are into the environment is to bring all of who you are into the environment. That's the first thing, because people still follow leaders. They still look at what other people do, especially when you're sitting in a corporate environment and you're sitting in a leadership seat. People take their cues from you. You know, how you dress becomes the uniform. You know, what you say becomes the language that's used. How you interact with other people becomes the mode of treatment of other people. So if you're one of those leaders that, you know, really challenges people all the time, berates people all the time, you know, never really lifts them up, guess what's going to happen through the rest of your team? But on the other hand, if you're the kind of leader that is public with the attaboys and the attagirls and celebrates people for taking risks and gives them the right kind of guidance, then guess what? That behavior is also going to be modeled throughout your team. So the first thing is to bring all of you into the environment. The second thing is to publicly recognize when somebody is taking the risk to do that themselves and applaud that and celebrate that. You know, and I tell leaders all the time, if you want to teach your team how to innovate, you have to teach them how to fail. And in order to teach them how to fail, you have to celebrate the failures. So when somebody takes a risk and it doesn't work out, you say, Mitch, that was a huge one. That was a colossal one. That one may really cost us. But you know what, team? We got to give Mitch some credit because he took the risk. And because he took the risk, we now know these three things. And we can use and leverage these three things for our next try and hopefully infect or create our next success. So being public and speaking on this, exercising your voice as a leader, showing people that you appreciate who they are distinctly is the thing that gives people the courage and the empowerment to continue to show who they are. And what I say to young professionals, Mitch, is, you know, people think that bringing your authentic self into an environment means you got to put all of you on display at the same time. Well, you don't have to put all of you on display, and that's the mistake I think that they make. You can afford to meet people where they are and decide which part of you at that moment is going to authentically connect. That's the key of bringing all of you into any room, but you have to emulate it as a leader if you want to unlock that in your people.
I really like that point. The idea that being authentic doesn't mean you have to put every single wrinkle and flaw out there in front of people that you have to work with. I've heard one of our other Global Leadership Summit speakers, Juliet Funt, make a very similar point. And I just think it's such an important point because everybody's trying to figure out where the line is these days. It's challenging, isn't it? It's a shifting, changing landscape, and giving everybody a little bit of grace is a really important thing, and also having the expectation that people are going to extend you grace. That also makes it easier, you know, for us individually too.
Absolutely, and that's the good thing about where we are now, Mitch, because the lines are loosening and becoming a little bit more blurred. The point that I have been giving to leaders is, you know, the fact that we can now talk about, and actually in some ways over the last 15 months have been forced to talk about those things that were taboo in the workforce, in the workplace before. That is such a good thing because those things that were unspoken gained extraordinary power. They wouldn't have had the power that they had, save for now all of a sudden they became the things that you couldn't talk about. Well, the problem with those things that were just subjects that you couldn't talk about, they actually became impediments and obstacles to extraordinary productivity in my mind, because if I can't bring all of me into the environment or I'm not comfortable doing that, then you're not getting all of me, which means any employer at any time may have been getting anywhere between 50 and 75% of what a person could bring to the table if they thought they had a shot. Now, by taking down some of those barriers, as a leader, you are potentially giving yourself access to 100% of somebody's talent, expertise, experience, intellect, or just their appetite to contribute.
Some people struggle with authenticity because they think I need to tell everything about everything, and I just need to. No, that's not authenticity. That's a need to go sit with a therapist. Authenticity is an invitation to stand in integrity. Integrity is the idea of things integrated. I am fully integrated. You're not getting one version of me, and I'm not going in another office giving another version of me, and I'm not talking to another group of people giving another version of me. When you sit with me, when you hear my voice, I am authentically speaking from the vision and the values and the principles that I want integrated in every fiber of this organization, every being of this organization. So it's not about telling all, it's really about believing all, and then speaking from a place of belief and reassuring and giving confidence. That's how you want to authentically lead, and that's what it means to lead with integrity, integrated, and authenticity, truth-telling.
I thought Albert Tate describing authenticity as standing in integrity was a great insight that complemented this conversation well. Let's dive back in with Carla and Mitch.
Diversity and inclusion, there's lots of reasons to emphasize it in the business world today. Social justice, it's the right and moral thing to do. But you can also just simply focus on it's good for business.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's good for business.
Full stop. I tell people, let's not talk about the right thing to do, because frankly, as people with different backgrounds, we might not agree on the right thing to do. But as business animals, we will agree on the commercial thing to do. Right? So let's focus on that point of commonality. Now let's take the argument around diversity and inclusion from that standpoint, and we'll get somewhere.
And I've seen one study after another show that when there is more diversity in the organization, at the leadership level, you see growth improve, you see innovation improve, and there you go. What about some of the things you're working on lately, including perhaps the Multicultural Accelerator at Morgan Stanley? Maybe share with us a little bit about how that came about and what are some of the things you're learning from that work?
Absolutely. I would love to. We started this the multicultural client strategy at Morgan Stanley started in the summer of 2014 when the chairman said to me, I want to lead in this space. No firm has gotten this right. And I want to be the firm that people know it gets it and engages constructively and productively with multicultural decision makers. And I said, thank you very much for your confidence, but what is that? He said, I can't tell you what it is, but I'll tell you what it's not. It's not traditional D&I because we're covering that in HR. It's not philanthropy because we have all the right relationships in the Morgan Stanley Foundation. But it really is something that has a commercial angle and that allows us to connect with multicultural decision makers. So it's one of the few times I've seen a Wall Street CEO give somebody a blank sheet of paper and say, create this. And oh, by the way, I want to lead. And from that, Mitch, we created 3 products, as I like to call them. One was a Senior Multicultural Leaders Conference. And that is the only conference that still exists in the marketplace where the most senior African Americans, Hispanic Americans, American Indians, Asian Americans get together for a business conference. But because the audience that we target, not exclusively, but that we target are multicultural decision makers in corporate and some civic leaders as well. And because the leaders are disproportionately multicultural, the conversation around cybersecurity and counterterrorism, the global capital markets, the imperative in the boardroom this year, the intersection between the corporate agenda and the civil rights agenda, by virtue of the topics and the speakers, the conversation is a little different than what you would hear in a business leaders conference in general. The second product was the Access and Opportunity podcast, and that's where we elevate the conversation around the inequity in the distribution of capital capital to women and people of color. And I'm proud to say we won a Webby this year, Mitch, which was our holy grail. So I'm really, really psyched about getting the Webby for Best Business Podcast. And then the other was the lab, as you mentioned. And that's where we bring in early stage tech-enabled companies, pre-Series A, that have been founded by women and people of color. And we give them three things. We give them cash in exchange for a single-digit percentage of their company, like every other accelerator that you know in the marketplace. We give them 6 months of content that is specifically designed to help them to evolve from being a founder to a CEO, because as you know, there's a difference. And we also connect them to some of our larger investment banking clients to scale the growth of their business and to obviously, hopefully make it go a little bit faster without these kinds of connections. And that's what the lab is all about. We are about to kick off our 7th cohort. We had been bringing in 9 or 10 companies per year, but after last year, with everything that transpired with the terrible tragedy with Mr. Floyd, we decided to double down on the lab. So now this year, we'll be bringing 20 companies through the lab. And when we found ourselves in this COVID-19 crisis last year, we pivoted on the dime. And because they used to come into Morgan Stanley proper, we have a beautiful lab that's in our headquarters, but we went virtual like everyone else. And we've now done 2 successful cohorts virtually, and we probably will do the next one virtually, but the one that starts in the beginning of 2022 will probably be some type of hybrid. So we have had an extraordinary success. I think we are busting the myth, either we have or we still are, that you can't find any, because I'll tell you, Mitch, that's still the prevailing answer and argument that you hear when you say to VCs, well, why don't you have more companies that were started by multicultural founders in your portfolio? Can't find any, right? And we started in the summer of 17, and all we did was go out on the Whisper Network. We didn't advertise. We didn't put it on the internet. And what I mean by the Whisper Network, my partner and I, Alice Vilma, went out and said, Morgan Stanley is starting an in-house accelerator. We're going to be giving cash and content and connections. If you know anybody that has a great business plan, great business, they're about to head to a Series A, tell them to send us their information. Within 2 weeks on the Whisper Network, we had 100 companies for 5 spots. The last invitation to apply for the cohort that just graduated had almost 700 applications. We opened with an invitation to apply 2 days ago. In 2 days, we're at 100 applications. So there's not a supply issue.
What you prove with the Whisper Network is if they couldn't find any, they just weren't looking in the right place. Maybe that's an amazing story and powerful. In January of 2019, you gave some career advice to some young people at Morgan Stanley. They were just starting out on their career journey. And what I saw is you talked about the importance of authenticity, of relationships, and you also encouraged them to have some flexibility in their goals, saying that sometimes other paths are far bigger and better than you could have ever imagined on your own. So maybe could you touch on each of these, including that last one especially?
Well, let me start with the last one. People ask me all the time, Mitch, did you know when you started out that you'd be doing exactly what you're doing? And again, I laugh because the answer is no. The only thing that I could have told you then was that whatever I was going to be doing, and at that time I was started investment banking, I was going to try to be at the top of my game. That was always my goal, to whatever that top was, whatever, excellence was, that's where I wanted to be. But I would not have seen Carla the author, because frankly, coming out of college, you'd have said, you're going to write a book. I would have laughed because I hated writing. And it turns out I'm pretty good at it. I might have seen Carla the singer because I love singing. So I was going to figure out some way to record, some way to perform. I wouldn't have seen Carla the entrepreneur who created, the lab, the podcast, the conference from a blank sheet of paper. I would not have seen Carla the speaker, because if you had said to me 25 years ago, Carla Harris, your voice is going to be important in the world, I would have thought you meant as a singer. Never would have thought that it would have been as a speaker. So I said that to them because your purpose, the things you're interested in, the things that you excel at, sometimes those things evolve over time. One experience leads to the next, to the next, to the next. When you are in college or graduate school, but certainly in college, and someone says, what do you want to be? What are you going to pursue? You think you're telling them what you're really interested in, but you're really telling them what's a function of what you have seen or what someone else told you all your life you ought to be. And for me, that would have been being a lawyer, because if you grew up in the South in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and you were black and you were smart, people generally tried to push you into one of three lanes: be a teacher, be a doctor or a nurse, or be a lawyer. And so for me, that was be a lawyer until I got exposed to finance and Wall Street. So I try to give them a sense that they don't have to get it all right now. And if they do think they have a plan now, you don't have to hold so tightly to it that you don't allow for other things that you learn or that just present themselves that might be far bigger and better than the vision you have today.
Carla, I got some similar advice early in my career from an HR executive at Procter & Gamble, a guy named Jim Lothrop. He pulled me aside and said almost exactly what you said to those young people at Morgan Stanley, and I can attest, for me, made all the difference. Carla, anything else on your heart or on your mind that you would like to share with emerging leaders?
Well, the biggest thing, and you touched on this before, and that is around the relationship building. You know, in certain communities, certainly in communities of color, people are still taught, to keep your head down, put the points on the board, focus on that performance, make sure you get it right. And, I just want to make sure that leaders understand that while you are acquiring the skills and while you are trying to put the points on the board, all of which are important, do not do that to the exclusion of building relationships, because I don't care what you do, you will not be able to do it alone. You will need other people's relationships in order to maximize your success. So make sure that you are intentionally investing in relationships very early on in your career. And it will not only accelerate your career, but it'll make the journey that much more enjoyable and exciting, because you will learn about people and you will learn about what people are doing that will add intellectually and experientially to you in a way that prosecuting your own agenda and putting points on the board will not do.
One of your many Carla's pearls that I know are out there that I like the best is where you talk a little bit about how early in somebody's career performance is so important, and then as you move later in your career, performance maybe isn't quite as important. It's now relationships, right?
Absolutely.
To speak to the point that you're just making now, and it's such a powerful point. You have said on at least a few occasions that I'm aware of that the way to increase your power is to give it away. And that's not necessarily intuitive for many people. So could you just speak to that for a moment?
Absolutely. You are one woman or one man, and if all roads lead back to you, then by definition, your success is going to be capped, because you are only one person. But when you invest in others' success, it comes back to you in ways that you would never imagine. Or you can look at it like the more people you invest in and the more people that you help to make successful, the larger your footprint is, and the more places you will be able to go, and the more opportunities you will have, because those that you have invested in are now more successful. And I'm so glad you asked me this question, Mitch, because I used to get the question all the time, especially when I spoke at women's events about women not helping other women. And, one of the points that I made in trying to really kind of drive the point home was that while you may be in a position of power today, you won't always be in a position of power, because that's just the law of the jungle. Evolution means at some point you have to give up your seat so that somebody else has a chance to lead. But you may not be ready to lead the playing field. Well, if you have not invested in that next generation of leaders, and now it's their turn to lead, and they know that you not only, did not invest in them just because you weren't thinking about it, but you intentionally did not invest in them, then guess what? Your runway just got truncated. But if you have invested in somebody else's success and you choose to stay on the playing field, these same people will create opportunities for you to continue to stay on the playing field if that's what you want to do. And I brought up that point not because that's the reason you ought to do it, but if you cannot connect with me on any other level as to why you ought to do it, then okay, I will appeal to your selfishness and say, that's why you ought to do it, so you'll still have a spot. But I will tell you that I've been pleasantly surprised because I didn't do it because I thought I was going to get something back. But in reflecting after over 30 years and looking at some of the people that I helped when they were having their struggles and to see where they are now, there's just no greater sense of accomplishment and pride that I have for them, and that I bothered to give somebody that 5 minutes or that pep talk or that box of Kleenex or whatever it happened to be. And that is empowering no matter where you are in your life.
Something like software in a way, isn't it? Where you can give somebody a copy and you still retain your copy as well. It's not so bad.
Well said. Well said, Mitch.
Well, how about the lightning round? You ready for this?
I'm ready.
We got 6 lightning round questions for you. So the first one is, what book are you reading right now?
I'm laughing because I'm reading my own new book. I have a new book that I'm working on, and I am feverishly reading that. And I have shut off everything else, Mitch, so that I won't pick up anybody else's content, inadvertently. So I am reading and rereading the new book that will hopefully be out in second quarter of 2022.
I see. Does it have a name you can share yet? Or
I can't share the name yet, but let's just say it's about leadership.
Well, we know the author is Carla Harris, right? So what else do we need to know? Next lightning round question. What app do you use the most?
Venmo and Cash App and Zelle, all 3 of them.
What app do you love the most?
Well, I would say it would be the spiritual apps, especially when I was traveling. I was always connecting to see what was new that day, and I still do. So I would say I probably love those a lot more than the financial apps.
It's a close call, though, right?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Who is the person in history that you'd really like to have dinner with?
Martin Luther King Jr., followed closely by Barbara Jordan.
If you had a mantra, what would it be?
Well, my mantra is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And the other one that is probably in the same place equal is all things work together for the good of those who love him and who are called to his purpose. So Romans 8:28 and Philippians 4:13, those are my go-to several times a day.
2 very good wells to draw from, the book of Romans and the book of Philippians. Yeah, indeed. And the final lightning round question, picking up on our slogan these days at the Global Leadership Summit podcast, what are you curious about?
I am most curious about technology, to be honest, Mitch. I have really tried to be intentional about learning something new every month, especially since we went into this shelter-in-place protocol. It was real clear to me that as a leader and a seasoned leader, if I wanted to continue to have relevancy, I needed to make sure that I continued to add to my intellectual and experiential tool chest. So while I have a lot of experience in what I do, the technology and the rate of innovation is happening so fast in technology that, I was behind, and I didn't realize how behind I was until we started using platforms like this. You had said Zoom to me in January 2020. I would have thought about the Aretha Franklin, George Michael song from 1994, Who's Zooming Who? That's what Zoom meant to me, right? So Zoom or, On24 or, Citrix or Cisco platform, all these different platforms that I now have had the opportunity to use, I'm being much more intentional about making sure I stay on top of new technologies. And so I'm most curious about that and the what's next and what am I missing and what don't I know about.
Terrific. Carla, I've heard you say that we are blessed so that we may be a blessing to others. And you most definitely have been that and more to me and to everyone listening to this podcast. Thank you so much.
It's been my honor. Thank you so much for having me, Mitch.
Carla and Mitch led us to some great learnings about showing up as our full selves as leaders and how that ripples to others. Let's look at another side of authenticity. How about when you're not authentic? Where can that lead? Blake from Oklahoma has a story that maybe you or someone you know can resonate with. On the outside, Blake was living the dream job with the dream life, but on the inside, it was turmoil. Instead of being open about what was going on, his anxiety, depression, and fear started to cripple him. He has a great story about choosing to open up and finding ways to share his struggles with the right people. His authenticity allowed him to connect with others who were struggling with similar issues. He had no clue others around him were struggling with similar things, but once he opened up, they were no longer alone, and out of that, a consistent group started meeting to find connection and support. Take a listen to what Blake said. Exposing my weaknesses and vulnerabilities has brought me a long way on a personal level and also with my team. Showing up authentically is just as important for ourselves as it is for those we lead. This world needs you. Yes, it needs fully you. What does this look like for you? I encourage you to go read his full story. We'll link to it in our show notes. One last thing I want to leave you with. As a curious, growth-minded leadership enthusiast, I want to make sure that you know about an upcoming event on February 24, 2022 that I promise you're not going to want to miss. Our team has invited some incredible thought leaders, so here they are revealed for the first time on the podcast. New York Times bestselling author and renowned business thinker Daniel Pink, award-winning entrepreneur and top media executive Margaret Heffernan, renowned educator, CEO, and author Principal Linda Clyett Wayman, and of course, founder and senior pastor of Life Church, Craig Rochelle. This event is brought to you on our interactive online platform where you can participate live with an incredible community of leaders like you from all over North America for 3 hours of rich learning, new ideas, and a fresh perspective. This event is going to be especially great for those of you who are ready for a fresh start after what has been a difficult season for many of us. It's an opportunity to start your year with focus, drive, and new energy. So get your tickets, join me for the Global Leadership Summit Special Edition on February 24th, and get ready to lead better in 2022. Learn more at globalleadership.org/special edition. That was globalleadership.org/special edition. Thank you again so much for joining us today. Until next time, stay curious, my friends.